The black Humvee screeched to a halt, smoke hissing from its hood like a warning. Captain Mark Stevens stepped out, his Navy SEAL insignia catching the sun, his voice already raised. This vehicle is carrying emergency supplies to a child evac unit in Norfolk. Get me the real mechanic, now. From beneath a rusted sedan, Sarah Mitchell rolled out, wiping grease from her cheek, coveralls stained, fingernails black. Just another nobody from nowhere, Virginia. You deaf? Stevens barked. I said I need a real mechanic, not some girl playing dress-up. He scanned her up and down, then scoffed. His team chuckled behind him. Sarah didn't flinch. She walked straight to the Humvee, laid her hand on the hood, and closed her eyes for a second. Turbo regulator, she murmured. Bypass valve's been jammed. Someone did this. On purpose. Her eyes darkened. If this thing doesn't move in 20 minutes, that convoy doesn't reach the kids. Stevens smirked. You're bluffing. Sarah turned back toward the engine without a word. Quiet, focused. But just before leaning in, she whispered. So soft only the wind could hear it. Last time they underestimated me, a colonel got discharged. Have you ever been underestimated because of how you look? Share your story below. I read every single one. Sarah Mitchell wasn't just another mechanic's daughter who'd inherited a rundown garage. Her father, Thomas Mitchell, had been the chief engineer at Lockheed Martin, the mind behind the F-35 Lightning's revolutionary engine design. But after a corporate espionage scandal in 2015 that had been framed by Robert Kane, CEO of Defense Tech Corporation, the Mitchell family lost everything. Thomas opened this small garage, teaching his daughter everything he knew about machines, about honor, about perseverance. Sarah possessed something rare, absolute pitch for engines. She could diagnose problems by sound alone, feeling vibrations that told stories others couldn't hear. MIT had offered her a full scholarship, begged her to join their aerospace program. She'd turned them down to stay with her aging father. For the past decade, Sarah had been the Pentagon's secret weapon, consulting under the codename Phoenix. Through encrypted channels and secure radios, she'd saved countless military operations, including 3 missions where Captain Stevens himself had been stranded in hostile territory. Her signature phrase, trust the machine, but trust your instincts more, had become legendary among those few who knew Phoenix existed. But Phoenix was a ghost, a voice in the static, never revealing gender, age, or location. 6 months ago, Thomas Mitchell had passed away, leaving Sarah not just a garage, but a legacy. In his workshop notebook, on the very last page, he'd written in shaky handwriting, "Daughter, don't let anyone define who you are. Let your work speak." The garage held more than tools and oil stains. On the wall hung Thomas's old leather jacket, Lockheed Martin, 1985 to 2015, embroidered on the back. It was a reminder of what they'd lost, and what they'd found, that true worth isn't measured in titles or recognition, but in the quality of one's work. Sarah knew today wasn't coincidence. The new hybrid engines in military vehicles, a project she'd consulted on as Phoenix, had been compromised. Defense Tech had won the contract after her father's disgrace, and Robert Kane had installed backdoor chips in every unit. She'd warned them, but her warnings had been modified, diluted, ignored. Now, as she watched Stevens pace impatiently, she knew the chickens were coming home to roost. Stevens barked into his phone, calling the Military Technical Center 50 miles away. The earliest they could send someone? Tomorrow morning. The problem was critical. The convoy was transporting classified equipment to Norfolk Naval Base. Deadline 2100 hours. 3 hours remained. Sergeant Rodriguez, a Mexican-American soldier with keen eyes, had been watching Sarah work on the other vehicle. She used no diagnostic equipment, just her hands and ears, yet every movement was precise, purposeful. "This woman isn't normal," he whispered to his colleague Chen, who'd studied at MIT. Chen's eyes widened as he recognized her technique. "That's the Mitchell method. Only 5 people in the world can do that." Rodriguez stepped forward, speaking carefully. "Captain, if she says she can fix it in 20 minutes... Stevens cut him off sharply. "I'm not putting $50 million of military technology in the hands of some..." He glanced at Sarah again, his lips curling. "Some small-town grease monkey." Sarah finished washing her hands and turned to face them directly. Her voice was steady, professional. "I understand your concerns, Captain. But if you don't address this now, hydraulic fluid will leak into the cooling system. In 2 hours, your engine block will crack. Cost to repair? $2 million and a 6-month wait for parts." She walked to her tool cabinet and pulled out a device she'd built herself, a hybrid of military and civilian technology. "Or I can seal the leak and bypass the damaged valve temporarily. Your vehicle will reach Norfolk safely." Stevens was about to refuse when his phone rang again. General Bradley from Norfolk, voice urgent. "Stevens, Intelligence has detected a threat. We need you back immediately. No delays. The captain's jaw tightened. Against every instinct, he nodded to Sarah. Rodriguez, watch everything she does. Every single thing. Sarah began her work, and Rodriguez found himself mesmerized. Her fingers moved across the engine like a concert pianist performing a complex sonata. Every motion was calculated, efficient, beautiful in its precision. Stephen stood apart, phone pressed to his ear, his voice rising in frustration. Where's Phoenix? I need consultation immediately. The vehicle's encryption system is showing anomalies. Sarah's hands paused for just a fraction of a second. She recognized the problem, the exact firmware issue she'd warned about months ago. But she couldn't reveal herself. Not yet. Not like this. 2000 hours, Sarah's phone buzzed with an anonymous message. Stay out of this, Mitchell's daughter. She knew immediately Robert Kane was watching through the garage's own security cameras. Without changing her expression, she typed a quick message to a contact, listed only as Owl. Code red, Kane active, need backup plan. As she worked, Sarah discovered something that made her blood run cold. The engine hadn't just been sabotaged, it had been weaponized. The complexity of the malware hidden in the vehicle's computer system was staggering, layer upon layer of code, designed not just to track, but to kill. She found Kane's signature in the code, but there was another layer, something more sinister. He was buying time, but for what? 2015, 15 minutes had passed. Sarah was nearly finished with the mechanical repairs when her diagnostic revealed the full scope of the threat. The vehicle's electronic systems had been compromised at the deepest level. Stop, she said sharply, her voice cutting through the evening air. If you start this engine now, the malware will activate. Your GPS coordinates will be transmitted to someone. Your vehicle has been hacked. Stevens whirled around, his face flushing. That's ridiculous. What would you know about cybersecurity? Rodriguez spoke up hesitantly. Captain, yesterday I noticed strange warning lights. Chen was already pulling out his tablet, connecting to the vehicle's system. My God, he breathed. There's a back door in the Intel chip. Stephen's face went pale. If their position was compromised, if the classified cargo's location was revealed, the implications were staggering. This wasn't just mechanical failure, it was an act of war. 2015 hours, 45 minutes until deadline. Stevens made frantic calls to the cybersecurity center, but they needed at least 2 hours to deploy specialists. We're finished, Chen said, despair creeping into his voice. Can't drive with the hack active. Can't wait for help. Sarah stood up, wiping her hands clean once more. She looked directly at Stevens, her gaze steady and unflinching. I can remove the malware, but you need to trust me. The captain's laugh was bitter, mocking. You? You're asking me to trust? I'm asking you to trust the only person here who understands this chip's architecture, Sarah interrupted, her voice carrying an authority that made everyone pause. I need 10 minutes to isolate the malware, 15 to write a temporary patch. The vehicle will run, but we'll have to disable all GPS systems. Rodriguez leaned close to his captain. Sir, we don't have a choice. Stevens checked his watch, his military training warring with his prejudices. Finally, he made the hardest decision of his career. Do it, Rodriguez. Inform Norfolk we're going dark. Sarah sat down at her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Code scrolled past like a waterfall, complex algorithms taking shape with breathtaking speed. Chen watched over her shoulder, his MIT training allowing him to recognize what he was seeing. This algorithm, he whispered in awe. Only Phoenix could write something like this. Stevens was too busy on his phone to hear, coordinating with Norfolk, preparing for silent running. 20-30 hours. Sarah hit a snag. The malware was more sophisticated than she'd initially assessed. It wasn't just tracking software. There was a secondary payload. Her face remained calm, but her mind raced. There's a bomb, she announced quietly. The garage fell silent. Every head turned toward her. Stevens' voice cracked. Where? Under the rear passenger seat. Remote activated via 4G signal. I've blocked it temporarily, but... She looked directly at Stevens. You need to call Phoenix. Now. Stevens frantically dialed the Phoenix hotline, the ultra-secure number known only to a handful of military personnel. The connection established, ringing once, twice. In Sarah's pocket, her phone vibrated silently. She didn't move, didn't reach for it, just continued typing as Stevens grew more desperate. Damn it, Phoenix isn't answering, he shouted, slamming his fist against the Humvee's hood. Sarah took a deep breath. This was the moment. Everything her father had taught her, everything she'd built in the shadows, came down to this choice. Captain Stevens, she said quietly. His head snapped toward her. What? He barked. His face flushed, with stress and anger. 2019, Kandahar. Your vehicle broke down in the middle of the desert. Phoenix talked you through a cooling system bypass using, she paused, a slight smile touching her lips, using urine as emergency coolant. Stevens froze, his entire body going rigid. The garage fell absolutely silent. 2021, Syria. Engine died during extraction. Phoenix taught you to use C4 explosive to shock start a seized piston. Her voice was calm, matter of fact, but each word hit Stevens like a physical blow. Who are you? His voice was barely a whisper, all authority stripped away. Sarah reached into her wallet, sliding aside the fake ID to reveal a Pentagon contractor badge underneath. Sarah Mitchell, codename Phoenix. Chen's gasp broke the silence. Your father was Thomas Mitchell. The man who designed the F-35 engine? He was framed, Sarah corrected, her fingers never stopping their work on the keyboard. But that doesn't matter now. What matters is stopping this attack. Stevens stood frozen, his world tilting on its axis. Every mission where Phoenix had saved him, every time that calm voice had guided him through impossible situations, every moment he'd wondered who his guardian angel was. Why didn't you say something? Why didn't you tell me? Because you wouldn't have let some small-town grease monkey touch your $50 million vehicle, Sarah replied, allowing herself a brief, sardonic smile. Now, I need 10 minutes of absolute silence. The garage became a cathedral of concentration. Only the rapid clicking of keys broke the stillness. Stevens watched her work, seeing her truly for the first time. The precision, the focus, the absolute mastery of her craft. This was the person who'd saved his life 3 times, who'd been the Pentagon's secret weapon for a decade, and he dismissed her without a second thought? Stevens suddenly dropped to his knees, the action so unexpected that his entire team gasped. I'm sorry, he said, his voice breaking. Not just for today, for every time my team and I assumed, for every time we dismissed someone because they didn't fit our image of competence. Stand up, Sarah commanded, not looking away from her screen. Kneeling won't help me defuse this bomb any faster. But when Stevens rose, Sarah saw his eyes were red, tears threatening to spill. For the first time in their 5-year relationship, conducted entirely through radio static, she saw the human being beneath the armor of authority. Apologies can wait, she said more gently. Trust the machine, but trust your instincts more. Stevens jerked at the familiar phrase, Phoenix's signature sign-off, the words that had accompanied him through hell and back. 2042 hours. Done, Sarah announced, leaning back from the laptop. Malware isolated, bomb defused, but whoever did this knows I've intervened. They'll send drones. You have 18 minutes to reach Norfolk. Stevens snapped back into command mode. Mount up, now. His team scrambled into the vehicle. As they prepared to leave, Stevens turned back to Sarah. Come with us, it's not safe here. Sarah shook her head, already connecting her laptop to Pentagon's secure servers. I have work to do. She was already tracing the hack's origin, her fingers dancing across the keyboard once more. You're going to handle this alone? Stevens asked, understanding dawning in his eyes. Not quite alone, Sarah smiled slightly. General Bradley owes me a favor. A SEAL team will be here in 5 minutes. Stevens saw it then, the full picture. While they raced to Norfolk, she would wage a different kind of war, hunting those who'd tried to turn American military vehicles into weapons against their own forces. Rodriguez and Chen exchanged glances, both men processing the magnitude of what they'd witnessed. The woman they dismissed, whom their captain had insulted, had been their guardian angel all along. Stevens extended his hand. Thank you, Phoenix, and I'm sorry about... Go, Sarah interrupted, shaking his hand briefly but firmly. Norfolk's waiting. The convoy roared to life and disappeared into the night. Sarah stood alone in the garage, the neon sign flickering overhead. Her laptop displayed rapidly scrolling data, IP addresses resolving, digital breadcrumbs leading back to their source. Target locked. Moscow. But more importantly, Defense Tech Corporation, Kane. She picked up her phone and dialed. General Bradley? This is Phoenix. I've found them. Prepare Cyber Command for immediate action. She paused, looking at her father's jacket on the wall. And General? After this is over, we need to talk about your contractor vetting process. The general's response was immediate. Whatever you need, Phoenix. And Sarah? Thank you. Again. She ended the call and returned to her work. In the distance, she could already hear the helicopters approaching, her backup arriving exactly on schedule. 1 week later, the Pentagon's secure briefing room was packed with 50 senior officers. General Bradley stood at the podium, his expression grave but satisfied. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to announce significant changes to our contractor selection process. The large screen behind him lit up, showing 2 images side by side. Sarah in her oil-stained coveralls working in the garage, and a list of Phoenix's operational saves over the past decade. From now on, we will not judge capability solely by credentials or appearance. True talent can emerge from anywhere. Captain Stevens, sitting in the front row, was the first to stand and applaud. The entire room followed, a thunderous ovation for someone who wasn't even there. At that same moment, Sarah was back in her garage, working on Mrs. Brown's ancient sedan. The elderly woman had been bringing her car here for 20 years, first to Thomas, now to Sarah. Her phone buzzed. General Bradley's voice was warm but businesslike. Defense Tech Corporation has been shut down. Robert Kane is in federal custody. We've traced the entire network. She set down her wrench, allowing herself a moment of satisfaction. Good. Sarah, the general continued, the position of chief technical advisor is yours if you want it. Corner office, full team, the works. Sarah looked around the garage. Her father's tools hung precisely where he'd placed them, his notebook still open on the workbench, his jacket watching over it all. Thank you, General, but I'm exactly where I need to be. I understand. Oh, and Stevens wanted me to pass along a message. They're establishing the Thomas Mitchell Scholarship Fund for talented kids who might otherwise be overlooked. Sarah's composure finally cracked. A single tear rolled down her cheek as she smiled. Dad would have loved that. And Sarah? One more thing. Thank you for teaching us all a lesson about making assumptions. The call ended. Sarah wiped her face and returned to Mrs. Brown's engine. As she worked, she could feel her father's presence in every tool she touched, every technique she employed. She thought about Stevens, about how he'd knelt in this very garage, how his tears had been genuine. People could change. Systems could evolve, but only when forced to confront their own blindness. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Sarah Mitchell, mechanical genius, cyber warfare specialist, guardian angel of America's Special Forces, tightened a bolt with practiced precision. Some heroes wore capes, some wore uniforms decorated with medals and ribbons, but sometimes, just sometimes, heroes wore oil-stained coveralls and worked in small garages along forgotten highways. They didn't seek recognition or acclaim. They simply did what needed to be done when it needed doing, with the quiet confidence that comes from absolute mastery. The bell above the door chimed as another customer arrived. Sarah looked up, wiping her hands on the same rag she'd used a week ago, ready to help. Because that's what she did. That's who she was. Her father's words echoed in the garage, as real as if he stood beside her. Let your work speak. And in the end, it had spoken volumes. Not in words or grand gestures, but in lives saved, disasters averted, and prejudices shattered. The work had spoken, and finally, the world had listened. As she approached the new customer, Sarah smiled. They probably saw just another mechanic in a small-town garage. They had no idea who she really was, and that was exactly how she preferred it. Some things, after all, never changed. Trust the machine, but trust your instincts more. The most powerful truth Thomas Mitchell ever taught his daughter, a truth that had saved lives, exposed corruption, and reminded the most powerful military in the world that competence has nothing to do with appearance. The garage fell quiet, except for the gentle hum of machinery and the soft clink of tools. Outside, life went on, but in this small space along Interstate 95, something fundamental had shifted. The world had learned that heroes don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they're quietly working right in front of you, waiting for the moment when their skills matter more than your assumptions. And when that moment comes, they don't hesitate. They simply do what they've always done, the right thing, the right way, for the right reasons. Because in the end, that's what real strength looks like. Not in uniform or title, but in the quiet confidence of someone who knows exactly who they are.